We live in an era marked by a strange contradiction. We have never been so connected and at the same time so lost. People go about their routines, post smiling photos, meet deadlines, respond to messages, produce, but internally something is not right. A persistent feeling of emptiness, a diffuse anguish, a fatigue that cannot be explained solely by physical tiredness. The modern individual, even surrounded by stimuli, lives in inner silence that screams. And the most frightening thing is that this widespread malaise does not stem from great external catastrophes, such as wars or natural disasters. It arises precisely from the absence of visible ruptures. It emerges in the everyday life that repeats without questioning, in the accelerated routine that does not allow for pauses, in the constant pressure to be productive, successful, and happy. For many, this feeling of being lost is treated as a weakness, as if it were a personal error, an individual failure to adapt to the world, but in fact, it may be the most lucid symptom of all. Feeling lost today can mean being awake in a world that has fallen asleep amid algorithms, performance metrics, and empty promises of progress. The contemporary individual does not live a crisis due to a lack of options. They live a crisis because there are too many options, too many distractions, too much information, too many demands, and in the midst of all this, they lose the essential, the connection with themselves, with the present, with the most basic sense of being alive. It is within this scenario that the ideas of Albert Camus resonate powerfully once again. Camus, a 20th century Algerian philosopher and writer, lived in a time of evident collapse. World wars, genocides, the nuclear threat. His generation witnessed the bankruptcy of the grand promises of Western civilization, and in the face of all this, Camus posed a brutally simple question: is life still worth living? This was not a theoretical question, it was a matter of existential survival. If the world no longer offers guarantees, if political, religious, or economic discourses have failed to provide us with security or meaning, how do we go on? This video is an invitation to pause, a moment to breathe, reflect, and perhaps rediscover what has been lost, not out there, but within, because being lost does not mean failure. Being lost can be the first step toward discovering a new path, and Camus, with his courageous and profoundly human philosophy, can help us navigate this path with greater awareness, even if it leads nowhere predictable. In the 20th century, Albert Camus observed a world in ruins. Two world wars had exposed the moral and spiritual bankruptcy of modern civilization. Barbarism was no longer an isolated deviation. It had become structural. The Enlightenment's promise that progress would bring reason, peace, and meaning was crushed by extermination camps, atomic bombs, and a humanity that seemed to have lost any moral reference. It was a devastating scenario where old values no longer served and new ones had yet to be born. It was in this context that Camus coined his central thesis, the absurd. The absurd for Camus is not an attribute of the world itself, but arises from the confrontation between the human need to find meaning and the universe's mute indifference. Human beings yearn for order, for answers, for a logic that justifies their pain and existence, but the world responds with silence, and it is from this confrontation that the feeling of absurdity emerges, a deep discomfort, a crack in the soul that can no longer be ignored. For a long time, it was thought that this type of nihilism was an exclusive characteristic of extreme times, such as wars or social collapses, but what we are experiencing today is a new form of absurdity, much more subtle, and therefore more dangerous. Liquid modernity, as Zygmunt Bauman would say, has dissolved the structures that once supported our identities, religion, community, ideologies, family. In their place, we have a constant promise of individual freedom and self-construction, which resembles a sentence of loneliness and continuous self-exploration. We live in a time where everything is possible, but nothing is certain, where all doors are open, but no one knows where to go, where we have access to all kinds of information, but we cannot transform it into wisdom. This abundance of possibilities, far from liberating, paralyzes, and the constant demand to be someone in a world that no longer offers clear references turns into a corrosive anguish. The experience of absurdity today is no longer just in the face of evident pain, but in the repetitive banality, the feeling of being alive without being present, of waking up every day with a slight nameless despair. Moreover, the language of the absurd has taken on new forms. It is no longer a cry of revolt against a cruel world, but a generalized apathy in the face of a soulless world. It is the employee who mechanically fulfills their shift without knowing why. It is the student who wonders what the point of studying is for a future that seems increasingly unstable. It is the young person who, even having access to everything, feels that everything is lacking. The absurd is in every infinite scroll, in every frustrated attempt to fill the void with notifications, series, or toxic productivity. Camus told us that the absurd arises from this confrontation between the human appeal and the irrational silence of the world, and never has this silence been as loud as it is now. It lies behind tired eyes, overly perfect social media, and conversations that say nothing. We live surrounded by noise, but what suffocates us is the emptiness between the sounds. But if the absurd is inevitable, what do we do with it? This was Camus's true obsession, and this is where we enter the central question he proposes. In the face of the absurd, there are only two options: despair or revolt. In the next part, we will understand how Camus transforms the feeling of absurdity, not into defeat but into a starting point, a silent call for a type of revolt that begins not with screams, but with presence. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The most dangerous war of our time is not fought with weapons or armies, but with distractions. The enemy is not visible, has no face, and precisely because of that, it is so effective. It operates in silence, in the glow of screens, in the sounds of notifications, in the constant sense of urgency that keeps us on alert even when nothing real is happening. It is a war against our presence, a war we are losing every day, even without realizing it. Camus said that human beings need to experience the world directly, to feel the sun on their skin, hear the wind, touch reality with their own senses, to regain some sense of belonging to existence. But we live in a society where direct experience is being replaced by carefully constructed simulations. The feed has become more real than the face. External validation has become more important than self-knowledge. The now has been replaced by the next. The logic of digital acceleration has devastating effects on the human psyche. We have never been so stimulated, and at the same time so empty. We jump from one task to another, from one video to the next, from one browser tab to three more, without ever really committing to anything. We live in draft mode, in incomplete versions of ourselves. Attention, which should be an active presence, has been hijacked by systems that monetize our time, our anxiety, and our need for meaning. It is not just a technology addiction, it is a new architecture of reality, where everything is designed to keep you entertained, but never awake. Social media has turned our lives into performance showcases, where we are at the same time both product and spectator. We come to exist, not by what we feel, but by what we show. Identity fragments, intimacy disappears, and in place of depth, the addictive superficiality of instant content takes over. This digital structure, which promises connection, has in practice produced isolation. Conversations become shallower. Listening is lost. The pause, which was a space for reflection, is now immediately filled with stimulation. Silence becomes unbearable, but it is precisely in silence that consciousness emerges, and that is exactly why the system eliminates it. Camus argued that human beings need to fully inhabit their existence, even knowing that it is absurd, and for that one must be present. But how to be present in a world that rewards distraction and penalizes introspection? How to live deeply in a culture that venerates speed and despises silence? The truth is that without realizing it, we have become accomplices of a reality that disconnects us from ourselves, and this disconnection, subtle and progressive, has a very high existential cost. we are losing what is most human, the ability to be here, now, with wholeness, with presence, with truth. There can be no revolt without presence, there can be no freedom without awareness of the moment. But Camus does not stop at the diagnosis. He offers us a path, a silent and profound response to absurdity and alienation, and this response is not theoretical, nor ideological, it is experiential, and it begins with a choice between despair and revolt. In the next part, we will understand what Camus meant by this choice, and why revolt, contrary to what many think, is not an act of violence, but of radical presence. In the face of the absurdity of existence, Albert Camus did not offer comfort. He did not try to soften reality with metaphysical promises, religious dogmas, or empty optimism. On the contrary, he started from the harshest premise: the world makes no sense. And instead of fleeing from this realization, he proposed that we confront it with lucidity and courage. For Camus, the awareness of the absurd is not the end, it is the starting point. But once you realize that life has no intrinsic purpose, that no salvation will come from outside, that all certainty is a fragile construction, what remains? According to him, two possibilities arise: despair or revolt. Despair is silent resignation, internal collapse. It is the act of retreating, even if the body continues to move. It is the subject who lives mechanically, who breathes out of obligation, who is content with mere survival, but no longer truly lives. In his work, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus discusses the total abandonment of the will to live, not only as an extreme act, but as an existential stance, one in which the individual renounces the desire to understand, to feel, to create. He continues to exist, but gives up living fully. The other option is revolt, but beware, for Camus, revolting against the absurd does not mean rebelling violently or destroying the external world. Revolt is intimate, silent, profound. It is an act of affirmation of life, even knowing that it is finite, uncertain, and devoid of objective justification. It is saying yes to existence, not because it makes sense, but precisely because it does not. Revolt is living, despite the absurd, or perhaps because of it. It is here that Camus' philosophy gains its tragic beauty. He does not invite us to flee from existential pain, but to inhabit it with dignity. The Camus rebel is one who, even aware of the farce of ready-made systems of meaning, chooses to stand firm, who creates, who loves, who contemplates, who acts, not because he believes in a guaranteed tomorrow, but because he recognizes the unique and irreplaceable value of the now. Revolt is the commitment to live with intensity, even without any guarantees. It is to refuse the comfort of lies, without falling into sterile nihilism. And this leads us to a powerful shift in perspective. If the world is indifferent, then everything that is real, everything that is felt, everything that is lived acquires an even more precious value. The beauty of a simple gesture, the intensity of a gaze, the pleasure of breathing deeply in silence. All of this gains an almost sacred importance, not because it carries an ultimate meaning, but because it is all we have. Camus was not a pessimist, as many believe. He was paradoxically a radical humanist. He believed in the human capacity to create meaning where no given meaning exists, to live with awareness, to commit to life, even when it seems empty, to say, I know that the universe is indifferent, but I am not. This is the central dilemma that Camus presents to us. Either we succumb to emptiness and lose ourselves in despair, or we choose revolt, a silent but deeply active revolt, that begins the moment we decide to be truly present in our own existence. But this presence is not just a state of mind, it demands something that has become exceedingly rare in today's world: to slow down. And it is precisely this that Camus proposes as a practical form of resistance, a deliberate return to the natural rhythm of life. In the next part, we will explore why, in an accelerated and productivity-driven society, slowing down may be the most subversive act of all. Camus believed that beauty resides in simple things, and that reconnecting with them is a legitimate path to existential salvation. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while dialogues with the unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Slow down. A simple word, but one that sounds almost heretical in the modern world. In a society built on the logic of productivity, speed, and constant optimization, stopping is seen as waste. Resting has become synonymous with weakness. Living slowly is interpreted as a lack of ambition. Time today is no longer lived. It is managed, fragmented into goals, tasks, deadlines, and performance metrics. But Camus, with his disconcerting lucidity, proposes exactly the opposite: to slow down, as an act of revolt, as a radical gesture of reconnection with the real. The Camusian revolt does not manifest in fiery speeches or noisy protests. It begins in the most intimate, in the decision to experience life directly, sensorially, immediately. For Camus, life finds its value, not in grand redemptive narratives, but in small concrete experiences: the warmth of the sun on your face, the sound of the sea, a walk without destination, the silent beauty of an unplanned moment. These moments, as simple as they are profound, have the power to pull us out of the stupor that speed places us in. Accelerated time depersonalizes. It does not allow for reflection, contemplation,